All right, so today what we're going to do is finish up our notes for this intro to HTML. My plan is we'll finish the notes, you'll do some work today, tomorrow, Thursday, and then take a quiz at the end of the week on Friday. So yesterday, just to kind of review what we did, talked about what HTML is, some other components or things that you might want to use when you're creating a website or designing a web page. And then we talked about how we use HTML itself. So remember that we're going to call these commands, we're going to call them tags. They're always going to show up in brackets. When you see me do my examples, remember I type mine in capital letters. You don't have to do that. I choose to personally because it helps stand out from the rest of the normal plain text, so if I have to proofread, it's a little bit easier for me to do so. But most of the commands that we use, all those tags in HTML, almost all of them will have a closing tag that ends the formatting. And then we talked about the parts of a document. So yesterday we said there's a head, there's a body, and there's a footer. I showed you a couple of footers online yesterday. Also told you that for our purposes, we don't do very much with the footer. We're going to be focusing on the head and the body. So yesterday we talked about the head. Not a whole lot to the head that we really talked about, just about putting in heading text, which is where you can have different options of sizes. And the only thing that these I call them the H tags, that they'll have in common is that they're going to put your text in bold. And of course, H1 is the largest size and H6 is the smallest size. H6 is actually so small that you'd very rarely have a use for it. But one very important thing that also goes in the heading was the title tag. And if you remember what we learned about yesterday, it's not going to show up on the page itself. What it's going to do is it's going to show up in your command tab of your browser, or possibly a title bar of a browser, depending on what internet browser you might be using. And the most important thing about it is that it's used by search engines. So if you are publishing a web page online, you want to put those keywords into it so that if someone's searching for something and you want them to find your page, that's one of the main ways that search engines are going to do that. There are a lot more things that go into search engines, but that is an important aspect. Today we're going to move on to the body. And remember what we said yesterday, that is the part of the page that's going to contain the bulk of information of your page. And so one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that it's going to start with a body tag. So in our HTML file, we will have a body tag that is going to define the beginning of the body. And then you could probably guess this, it will end with a closing body tag. So very similar to what we had yesterday with the head. And just like we said, it's going to contain most of the graphics and most of the text of the page. And I'm going to give you just a few types of tags for formatting your text in HTML. When we move on to the CSS language a little further down the road, you'll learn a lot more that you can actually do. But one of the things that you can do is be able to start a new line on a page. And I'm not sure if you remember seeing yesterday my sample. I had the text like blah, 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 blah. And I think I put like board, board, board. And I could probably find that. So let me go to my desktop for a minute just to show this to you. This is probably the wrong one. That is the wrong one. So let me go to my Monday file. Wherever my Monday file is. There it is. Okay. Yeah, Mrs. Rivera needs to clean up her desktop for sure. Okay, if you take a look at the text on my screen here. So I have all my heading text that we went over yesterday. Then you'll see blah, 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 board, board, board. Now, if I open that file in Notepad where I created it, I have the blahs on a separate line from the board repeated words. But that's one of the things where I said HTML is dumb and it can't be intuitive. So just because I have this on a different line doesn't mean it's actually going to display it on a different line. So you have to tell the browser when to start a new line. So there are two commands that you can do in HTML. Like I said, when we move on to CSS, there's a lot more you can do, but we can use a tag called BR. And notice there's a closing tag. And it's kind of a goofy one because we put the BR tag and the closing tag right next to each other. It's like start it, stop it, okay, you're done. What this does is it stands for line break, and it single spaces to a new line. So that's one way that we can do it. And then another tag that we can use is the P tag. And again, you can put a closing tag right after that. P in this case stands for paragraph. And what this is going to do, it's going to double space to a new line. Depending on the browser that you use, it might look a little different. So let me go back to my sample file from yesterday, and I am going to put a break tag in here, and then I'm going to reload my page, and you can see that it did that, but it looks like it actually double spaced instead of single spacing. Now I'm going to do this. I might actually have you change something here. I'm going to try it without the closing tag. Yep. Okay. I am going to have you do this. I'm going to get rid of, in your notes, closing BR tag, because as you can see I'm using Microsoft Edge, that browser doesn't seem to handle that quite well. So we will say no closing tag needed. There. That'll make it less confusing. All right, then let me just go back to that file, and instead of a BR tag, let me throw in a P tag, and let me see what happens. And let me see what happens. There. Okay, so the P tag, we're going to leave that closing tag in. And you can see now my blah, blah, blahs and my board. They are double spaced from each other. So think of HTML as being kind of like an old-fashioned typewriter. On an old typewriter, if you wanted to start a new line, you had to physically press the return key. And so in HTML, you're going to need to insert either the break tag or the paragraph tag to force it down to a new line. Now, if I have a lot of text in my document and it runs out of room, it will end up just starting a new line automatically. So I'm going to do this. I'm just going to add some bunch of blahs here. And I'm going to reload my page just so you can see what this looks like. So now when I reload it, you can see once it gets to the end of the line, it will start a new one. But if you wanted to do what I would call a hard return, that's what we called it back in the old typewriter days, then you would need to physically insert. You'd have to put in a break tag or a P tag. Another thing I want to show you just really quickly before we move on, when I was talking about the syntax yesterday of commands and how they go inside brackets, and if you forget a bracket or you forget something, it'll mess up the page and it'll just display it as normal text. And I want to show you what that looks like. So if, for example, my H6 tag up in my head, if I forget my bracket right there, and then I'm just going to reload the page. Okay, so let me go back to the browser. This is what it looked like before I made a mistake. Now when I reload it, see what happens here? It never stopped the tag in front of it, which in this case was the H5 tag. So everything shows up in H5. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. All right, so let me fix that and make sure that I'm back in business, that it's correct. There we go. Okay. All right. So then the last part of our notes is dealing with colors. This part gets, oh wait, no, I'm wrong. I have a couple more formatting techniques, then we'll talk about colors. Okay, so if you want to make your text bold, we use the tag strong. We put it in front of the text that we want to be bold. We put a closing tag at the end. And don't forget the closing tag because it'll make everything bold that comes after it. We can also make text italic. And the tag that we use here is called EM, stands for emphasis, and a closing EM tag. Now, if you think about things that you do in a regular word processing program like Word, our basic formatting techniques are bold, italic, and underline, right? We're not actually going to put underline in our notes right now, and the reason is because on a web page, when people see underlined text, they tend to assume that it's a link because hypertext links, the default is that they're underlined. So we don't want to confuse people on a web page and have them clicking on things. So let's say that you were trying to insert the name of a book title into a web page. Well, in a paper, you would probably underline that book title, right? I believe that's the proper way to do it. But in the case of a web page, you would either make it bold or italic to make it stand out in some other way. Okay, so that's bold and italic, and I'll just show you really quickly what that looks like. So I am going to take one of my blahs and make it bold. And I'm going to make one of my boards and make it italic so you can see what this looks like. The other thing that I realized that I didn't include was, remember, this is my body of the document. I don't have a body tag. So I'm going to throw in my body tag right here and my closing body tag. Try that again. My closing body tag right here. So we're telling the browser, here's the beginning of the body, here's the end of the body. Now my page still looked fine without it, but you don't want to make that mistake because some browsers can't handle if you eliminate some commands that you should have in your page, some tags. So now I'm going to reload my page. And the only thing that I'm going to point out to you here is the text is all still there, but again, third word over on my top line of this blah, blah, blah stuff. There's my word in bold. And then down here in my last line, my second board, you can see that's in italics. So that's how you can control that a little bit more. Okay, so now we're going to move into colors. Let's see. All right, so colors are kind of complicated. Later on, you'll learn some easier things that you can do with colors on a web page. But it's really important for you to understand the complicated part. And that is that colors on a web page, and there are millions of different shades, they're actually formed by a combination of only 3 colors. So every single color that you see on a web page is somehow created by combining 3 different colors. And the 3 different colors are red and green and blue. And this is where a lot of times my students get really confused because how could you possibly get a color like orange, a color like yellow, a color like white, a color like black out of these 3 colors? So hopefully you'll get a better understanding of it once we go through it. Okay, so red, green, blue, we think of that as just RGB. Okay, so the way that this is done in a web page is through something that we call a hexadecimal code or a hex code. Okay, and if you think about the prefix hex, like a hexagon is a shape with how many sides? 6 sides, right? So a hexadecimal code is a 6-digit code. And each of those 6 digits could be a number. So they could be the values 0 through 9, but they can also take on the value of a letter, A through F. So an example of a hex code would be like 111111. I could have it look like that. I could have a hex code that looks like 1A, 1A, 1A. I could have a hex code that was CCC, CCC. So any combination of these particular letters, A through F, and the digits 0 through 9. So let me explain this a little bit further. In our hex code, the first 2 digits represent the amount of red, the value of the color red. And the second 2 digits represent the value of green. And the last 2 digits represent the value of blue. And when we do this, you have to keep in mind that each color has 256 values. So there are 256 shades of red, so to speak, and 256 shades of blue, or strengths of blue, and 256 strengths of green. And so when we represent these values, the first value, which is nothing, is the value 0, and the strongest value of each color is 255. So from 0 to 255, that adds up to 256 different values. Okay, so here's where there's a problem. If I have a 6-digit code and only 2 digits can represent each of my colors, how am I possibly going to be able to express a value like 200 and squeeze it into 2 digits, or a value like 255 and squeeze it into 2 digits? And that's where the letters come into play. Okay, so the letter A represents the number 10. B represents 11, C represents 12, D is 13, E is 14, and F is 15. Okay, so when I use the letters, they are multiplied by the other digit to represent the value. Okay, so for example, let me give you a few here. If I had a code that was, I'll explain the format of this in a minute, but we always put a hashtag in front of it, and when we put it in a command, it's always going to show up inside quotation marks, but we'll get to that in a minute. If I have a code that's FF0000, that means, and again, first 2 digits are red, second 2 digits are green, last 2 digits are blue. So I've got the full strength of red. That, remember what I said, F represents 15. So 15 times 15, what do you get? You get 255. If I have no color value for green and no color value for blue, what I'm going to end up here with is the color red. If I do 00, FF 00, same thing, I'm only getting one concentration of a color, and because it's the middle 2 digits, that's going to give me the color green. And if I do 0000 FF, that is going to give me the color blue. And I am going to give you a couple of other examples. If I do all zeros, that is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, there we go. If I do all zeros, that is going to be the absence of color, right? Absence of color, that gives you black. And if I go with all Fs, I end up with the color white. So if we do the strongest concentration of red, green, and blue, we get white. And I'm going to give you another one just because it's kind of a funky one that doesn't make sense at all. If I do FF 00, okay, so understand I've got my strongest value of red and my strongest value of green and no blue, I end up with the color yellow. So what you have to be able to do is kind of give up the idea of what you learned when you were little. Maybe you were doing art projects in school and you were painting, and if you mix the blue paint and the yellow paint, you got green. Or yeah, if you mix the blue and the yellow, you got green. If you mix the blue and the red, you got purple. Actually, that one still works for a web page, but a lot of the other ones don't. Okay, so the syntax of your hex codes. Always put a hashtag in front. Always put inside quotation marks. Okay, if we do nothing with a web page, we end up with black text and a white background. And I might have pointed that out yesterday. But those are your default colors. And if you want to set your colors on a page, do this. If you want to set your colors on a page, what we're going to do is we're going to use the body tag, but we're going to add something to it that we call an attribute. An attribute is just an extra instruction for a tag. And it is not included in a closing tag. So it's just something extra that's been added on. Okay, non-computer example, let's say I needed a loaf of bread from the store, so I'm too lazy to go to the store, so I ask Sam to go for me. Hey Sam, can you go to the IGA for me, buy me a loaf of bread? She says yes. Okay, that's the instruction. And then I'm like, oh, by the way, will you buy me a Reese's peanut butter cup while you're there? That's kind of like an attribute. It's a little add-on. If we do this in a web page with adding colors to the body tag, and we do that, we just put spaces in between, and I'm going to show that to you here in just a second. And then at the end of it, the regular closing body tag is just like it normally would be. So the regular closing tag in any HTML command is only going to be the command itself. It'll never have more than one word to it. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example here. I would do body space BG color, that all goes together with no words, or with no space, excuse me, and then I do equals, and then in quotation marks I'm going to put in my code. So if I go 000, 000, 000, I'm going to end up with a background color of black on my web page. If I want to change my text color, I can do that too. All I have to do is put another space, text equals, and then in quotation marks I'm going to put in my hashtag and my color code. FFF, FFF, and that is going to get me my white text. Okay, I had to put this on pause for a minute and help one of the teachers with the computer problem, so I'm not quite sure where I left off with what I was saying. But if you look at my screen of notes, and I've got my body BG color equals, in quotation marks I have my hashtag and my color code, and then I have a space, text equals, and then in quotation marks I have my hashtag and a color code. That's the format that you want to have. And I am going to try to see if I can squeeze this all on one line so you can see it, because it's kind of broken up that way. There. Okay, kind of small, but you can see how that would look. So now what I'm going to do is go back to our sample that we did, and now all I'm going to do is just add some color to it. So body space BG color equals, and then I'm going to do something different. I'll go FF 0000. Okay, that should get me a red background color. And then I'll do text equals, and I'm going to go hashtag 0000FF. That should get me a text color of blue. And again, I'm not going to do anything with that closing body tag. It's just going to stay the same. Then what I'm going to do now is go to my browser, and if I did it right, I'll get my colors. And there I did. So a red background with blue text. So one of the things that I'm going to have you do is kind of experiment a little bit, because it's just trial and error. Now those colors are no-brainers because we know the R and the G and the B for the red, green, and blue. but just experiment a little bit and try some random things. Like, what happens if I do all A's and I reload my page? What kind of background color is that going to give me? Well, let's check it out. I end up with what looks like gray. Makes sense too, right? Because we know all zeros would get us black. So if we're adding some more intensity of those colors, those values, then we're just going to be lightening up a little bit. What if I just do like 4F, 6B, 7D? What's that going to get me for a background color? And I end up with kind of like a dark bluish gray, or like a slate blue, maybe you'd call it. I don't know. So I have an assignment that I always give to my class when they learn web pages and how to do the colors. I give them an assignment where you have to experiment with some colors and create your own shades and create a Google Doc with a list of your color codes that you came up with, and then a name that you gave for that one. So for example, if this was mine, maybe I'd call it slate blue, or yeah, I'd call it slate blue. Sure, we'll go with that. Maybe I'm experimenting colors and I get like a really gross brown color. Maybe I'll call it poop brown. Maybe I end up with an ugly like greenish color. Maybe I'll call it puke green. Maybe I end up with a really like super light blue and I want to call it sky blue or baby blue. Okay, so you get the idea, and that'll be one of the next things that you're going to do. So this is the end of the notes for this section, and I am going to have you submit them to me on Google Classroom so that I know you're all finished with it. Like I said, the rest of the week we're going to be doing some assignments and then taking a quiz on this on Friday. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know.